Hey everybody, I've gotten a couple of questions about how I've been creating the Cantamus App playback videos that I've been doing of choral scores. And I wanted to just kind of go through my process about how I've where I am at the moment as far as getting good playback out of the app and making it sound a little bit more like a chorus. I know I see a lot of people put up videos, and a lot of times I feel like it's just kind of the output from the app, but it turns out you can actually get a little bit more out of it than you might otherwise think with just a few little tricks. I've written a few comments in some of the other videos that kind of go over this in written form, but I thought a video would be nice to be able to point to in case people had other questions. In case you're not familiar, Cantamus is a web app. It's designed for vocal ensembles. Basically, what it allows you to do is to upload a music XML file. And from that music XML file, it will create a digital render of that piece of music, that piece of choral music. And this is where it's really interesting, including the text. So you could always take a piece like what I've got here on the screen and produce sort of, either a sampled or a synthesized choir singing it maybe on the vowel ah or oo. But what this allows you to do is actually include the text. So if I start playback here,
And it seemed as if the stars and water and roses were listening to the
so yeah,
voice
I'm gonna let that play a little bit in the background. You've been able to do something kind of like this with sample choirs for a while. I know East West has their Hollywood choirs, which have a word builder in them, but it's really not designed for you to take a very, very long set of text and render it like this. It's really designed for very short phrases. It's designed for trailer music where your choir is going to be kind of shouting out the same Latin phrase over and over again. Whereas what this is designed to do is be a lot more flexible. Now, there are some limitations in the app from like a composer's perspective, in that it's really meant so that, like, say, if you were a soprano and you were wanting to learn your part, you could go in here and you could just have just your part sung to you. I go to measure 9 here. And then you can listen to your part by itself, and you can learn it. You could add in the other parts, etc. But it's not really designed to be a quote-unquote realistic render of that text and of that piece of music. But it turns out that, the playback is surprisingly good given its limitations, and I do think that when you listen to something even like this, you're getting a fairly good representation of what it would sound like with a real choir. I mean, it's pretty close. Like, this is the one I uploaded yesterday, or today, earlier today. Now, one of the limitations, of course, stop the playback there, is that it sounds like 4 people singing. So how do you make it so this sounds a little bit more of an ensemble? Well, you're going to obviously be layering playback over itself in order to sort of multiply the number of singers, right? So a problem with doing that is that, as I'm sure many of you know, when you layer one recording on top of another and they're the exact same recording, you get an effect called phasing, which is very noticeable. It sounds very weird. And especially with something like this, I imagine it sounds extremely weird because this is already obviously a little bit off. It doesn't quite sound realistic. It doesn't sound like exactly how a real person would sing. A real person would obviously sound much more artistic and much more rich, etc. So what you need to do is you need to create layers that you can put on top of each other that won't cause that phasing. And the way that you do that is with transposition. If you've ever worked with MIDI before, sample libraries before, you know that you can often take the same sample library and layer it over itself and create then the sound of two of those either ensembles or two of that one instrument. And the way that you have to do this is you have to send different transpositions of the same MIDI to different instances. And by doing so, you are triggering different sets of samples. Now, if you just did that on its own, obviously you would get a piece in C. If your piece was in C, your melody might be in C, and then the other melody might be in D, and then another melody. You get this really polytonal sound that you're probably not going for. So what you have to do then on the other side is then pitch shift everything back to the original key. So that's basically what I'm doing here with Cantamus, is I start by making a version of the piece of music that I'm wanting to use that is specifically designed for Cantamus. It's not the score that I'm going to eventually make as sort of the canonical version of the piece of music. It's the one that's going to go into Cantamus alone. And the reason that I do that is that Cantamus is a little strange sometimes, and it can sometimes need some weird sort of adjustments. So for example, one thing I didn't do in this piece, and I haven't tried yet, is instead of using I for that personal pronoun I want to see what happens if I put in the word I as in the thing you use to see. Because if you notice, the word I has two parts. It's what's called a diphthong. I, right? And when you listen to it in Cantamus, it just does which is the value you would want to be on. If I were singing this, I would sing, had I the, but you still have that little y at the end of the I, the. And obviously in Cantamus, you don't get, so you don't get that last y, so all you hear is had the heavens, which can sound a little weird. So that's the kind of thing. I've done a few pieces like this. In one, I went in and actually changed some of the lyrics. In this one, I did not. But the other thing that you want to be able to do here is you want to be able to take this piece of music and you just want to be able to say, transpose it. So here's the same piece of music. Of course, everyone can see it's just transposed up a half step from this one on the left. And you make various transpositions of your piece of music. What I chose to do for this one was to do all the way up to 3 semitones above and below. Okay, so I have the original, I have it down a half step, down a minor third, down a whole step, up a half step, up a minor third, and up a whole step, right? Because that's all the sort of the transpositions that are within 3 semitones of the original key. Now, I am early in my sort of explorations of how to do this in a really useful way, and I don't think that this is necessarily the most perfect way. And the reason is, and I just wanted to include this in the video, is that when you transpose something up with a pitch shifter, which I've got right here, I've got this little pitch shift plugin. This is built into Logic. I'm just using the regular old one. When you pitch shift something up, it becomes a lot weirder and more distorted. So if I just play, so here's what the original piece sounds like. So one of the things that I think is not working here is these down half step and down whole step and down minor third. If you listen to the ones that have been, these are being transposed back down. These were, I transposed them up in Dorico and then I, rendered them all out and then I'm now pitch shifting them back down. They don't sound too bad. These are just the pitch shifted ones. it sounds pretty good. It's not crazy realistic, but it sounds pretty much, it's pretty much like the other, the original key, right? The original render. If you listen to the ones that have been pitch shifted up, not so good. A lot more obviously changed, a lot more obviously moved around. There's a reason for this. I don't actually remember why, but sound, for whatever reason, especially instrumental or vocal sounds, for whatever reason, it's always better to pitch shift down if you can. So I think if I were to do this over, I might go in and just get rid of all the ones that I had to pitch shift up, thus leaving me with just the original and the ones that were then pitch shifted down. Just going to add in the ones that were pitch shifted up. You can hear that the vowels are a little bit more distorted when I add those back in, so I need to sort of experiment with how many semitones I can go away from the original key and make transposed versions before it starts to become so distorted that I can no longer pitch shift it down in any reasonable way, because obviously what you would ideally like is to have as many of these as is humanly possible in the file here, so that you have as many quote-unquote singers, right, in the final recording to give it that really ensemble-y sound. Now, the other thing that I found that is really useful to do, if you look at these, they look like they're all sort of lined up. But if we were to zoom in, you can see that I have offset them as much as I can, kind of away from each other. In Logic, you do that. You can do that easily with the nudge command, which is just Option and the left and right arrow keys. And what that sort of is doing is kind of adding in that bit of imperfection that happens in any normal ensemble, where some people are hitting, the t vowel or the t consonant or the k consonant or any sort of rhythmic moment. They're always going to not hit it exactly and precisely together. So I found that was really helpful in terms of making the overall sound feel a lot more like a real choir, because if you listen to it like a real choir and you hear when they get to, let's say, a word that ends on a t, t, you hear this sort of mess of it's obviously not quite that dramatic in real life, but that sort of your brain expects to hear that from an ensemble. And so if you have, this is whatever it is, 28 tracks, I think, that are all hitting t at the same time, it sounds very weird and very bizarre. So I found that was a very, very important part of preserving this. And that's definitely something I'm going to keep doing going forward. As I mentioned before, probably going to stop pitching things up, or at least certainly not pitching as many tracks up. I might pitch one up from maybe a half step. And then maybe see if I can get further away in the upward direction originally, so that I can pitch down a little further once it gets here. Another thing that I think is worth looking at is, how when it comes out, a thing that obviously saves a lot of sampled music and actually recorded music too is just having some nice reverb on it to sort of smooth everything out, push everything together to sort of kind of be a little blanket on top of a lot of the imperfections. Here I'm just using cinematic rooms. You could honestly use any reverb. I know a lot of people love this reverb. I love this reverb. You do not need it though. It's very expensive. So you don't feel like you need to buy it. This is the reverb I'm using here. I think actually on the version on YouTube, I might have been using a slightly different preset, but it was very, very similar to this. I also like to use this Soothe plugin, which is just sort of a dynamic EQ that kind of goes in and tries to notch out some of the places where everything is sort of starting to build, where frequency areas are starting to resonate and build up. If you'll notice, like way over here where it gets... It's not doing a lot. But without it... I should use there. Sorry, I should use the bypass. It's just like a little bit, just to kind of clean it up. I try not to overuse this. You can really overuse this. I mean, you can do something like that and really get... I don't like to do that. I like just a little bit, just as little as possible. I have this sending through just a Ozone preset. It's called Smooth Bass because I noticed that there was a lot of stuff happening in this region that was really starting to build up. So it does that. It's these dynamics to set up for you. It it compresses it a little bit with a maximizer. I always send things through Gullfoss because I'm a weirdo. Again, expensive plugin. You don't need it. I find that it helps. I like it. And then I send everything through Oxford Inflator to give it that, that final just like... It's so hard to describe what this does. It's a compressor essentially. Anyway, that's the finalization that I use, and I use that on almost everything. Some combination of those plugins. But yeah, I mean, that's how you get it. Now, I think the product that we're getting right now out of that, the actual recording, very, very far from an actual nuanced human performance, of course. But it really does give a good sense of what one of those performances could be like, right? When you listen to the Cantamus playback, more so than any other tool that I've ever used for choral music, you really feel like you know exactly how this would sound if you were to give it to a real professional ensemble. So in that sense, I think it's a really useful tool. And in that sense, I will probably continue to try to refine this process that I'm showing you here. And I will continue to try to, I guess, what's the word I'm searching for? I will continue to be putting up pieces like I have been doing, because I think it gives a really good sense of what the piece would be like for ensembles. I mean, part of the reason I like to put things up on here for obviously my loyal community and channel follower people, but also I'd love it if like a choral director happened to stop by and love the piece, wanted to perform it, right? And I think that when you're a composer who doesn't get a lot of performances, one of the hardest barriers for you to get over is that initial trust factor of like, what is this going to sound like? Do I really want to commit my ensemble to rehearsing this? Do I want to commit time on a program to this? Do I really want to, devote my energy as a conductor to this kind of piece? And I think this kind of tool is really useful for composers in terms of giving you that ability to at least give people that sense, a general sense of what you're doing, even if it's not the most quote-unquote beautiful version that the song could be. I mean, I think this song would be much, much better, of course, with real singers and with a real choir. So that's the Cantamus app. It's a little, it isn't free. You can get a free trial, I think, for like a month, and get a few renders out. Then I think it's like what is it, like $10, €10, something like €9 a month or something. I can't remember exactly what their pricing is. And then what happens is that every time you upload something here, it takes some time and it renders it out for you and makes these renders that I've got in front of me here. And each one of those consumes a certain amount of tokens. So even when you're in the paid version, you don't get to just like shove tons and tons and tons of stuff up here. You really do have to kind of be careful, which is one of the reasons I wanted to make this video, is that I have burned a lot of my tokens sort of exploring this. So I was hoping that for people who, maybe are on a, where the budget here is maybe more of a concern, that to try to save you some of those tokens, because you really can burn through them very quickly, especially, if you're making 7 versions of a single piece of music. So that's how I did that. Again, you can see this one I posted maybe a few weeks ago, and that one was only made up of 3 singers per, but that's still 12 singers. Now, an important part of this I just wanted to mention toward the end is that when you're going to take your recordings out, I highly recommend you split them into your SATB sections. And the way that you can do that is you can just open up one of these pieces. You can go to this little mixer down here at the bottom, and you can mute, say, everything but the soprano, and then you can say download mix down, and you will get just the soprano track. Then you can mute the soprano, unmute the alto. Same thing, download mix down, now you've got an alto. Do that with the tenor and bass, and you've got 4 tracks. What this ends up looking like for me is, once you get out all the files, I end up with this, right? Where I've got 4 versions of each transposition of the piece that I can then import into the DAW of your choice, or in my case, into Logic. So, I'm sure that there are pretty good pitch shifters out there that are free. I know someone had mentioned using Audacity. I would expect Audacity to have some sort of pitch shifting built in. Excuse me, I'm just going to cough, and I don't want to blow anyone's ears out. Oh, thank you. So I'm sure there's a good pitch shifter in Audacity, in Ableton, and in Cubase. Cubase definitely has one. And if not, there should be. There's got to be a free one out there. It's not a super. Just make sure you're getting one that is able to correct for the timing, and is able to, get it to the right key while preserving all your rhythm and stuff like that. A lot of pitch shifting will, when it's being shifted down, will extend the length, etc. So, yeah, that is kind of an overview of what I've discovered. I think that going forward, like I said, my approach is going to be to try mostly doing, starting with things that are transposed up so that I can pitch them down. I may go look around for some different pitch shifting options. This, like I said, this works just fine, but I actually think you might be able to do a little better, especially if you wanted to really rely on pitch shifting up. You might be able to find a plugin that can do it better. I'm sure I would love to throw this into Melodyne and see what it could do. So I'm sure there's other options in there. Like I said, I'm still refining the process. And I just wanted to, like I said, make a video that sort of went over it, and hopefully save some people some tokens if you were paying for Cantamus, so that you could get more stuff out. So anyway, thanks so much, and I will see you around.